Good evening. Maybe we can open with the sound of the bell and just take a moment to let go of the day and rediscover the breath and settle in this moment. Sound of the bell is a beautiful thing. Some say it's the Buddha's voice calling us home. Welcome everyone. It is August 25th. My name is Peter Kuhn. I am zooming in from San Diego, California, which is the historic land of the Kumeyaay people. And I invite you to take off your shoes if you care to and feel at home as we gather in the Ocean of Zoom meditation hall this evening from distant parts of the world. It's an auspicious occasion to be together, and I'm very happy to be with all of you. And for me, this is very special, and I just want to take a moment to introduce our distinguished guest, uh, Shantum Seth, and say that in my experience, when I really pay attention going through life, I have met extraordinary people. And Shantum is one of those. I had the gift and opportunity to go on a retreat with him, I think about 12 years ago, Footsteps of the Buddha with Thich Nhat Hanh and the Sangha, and visit many of the historic sites. And in the course of spending 10 days traveling with Thai Shantum, I was deeply moved by his knowledge and his wisdom, by his goodwill and grace, and really transmission of loving kindness, care, and compassion. So it's really wonderful to be able to sit with you tonight, Shantum. And here in the West, Shantum's probably best known for the Buddha Path transformational journeys that he hosts and curates. And he's done them with many distinguished Dharma teachers and communities. But I have come to realize that Shantum's life, as well as maybe each of ours, is also a transformational journey. And that a little bit about him, for those who may not know, is that um, Shantum comes from a very distinguished family and has gone through many incarnations in the life so far, from a life of the corporate world in England, to activism, political activism, commitment to peace, and how do I say this, social development through Oxfam, and over a decade with the United Nations, as I understand it, their development programs. And after this years of commitment to wanting to advocate for peace and create conditions for peace in the world, Shantum's own words say that he realized that he, rather than work for peace, that he needed to be the peace that he wants in the world. And this is a very deep and beautiful insight. And actually, the name of the retreat I was on is Peace in Oneself, Peace in the World. And this is a very beautiful, profound empowerment that Shantum and Thai have shared with all of us. He was ordained by Thich Nhat Hanh in 2001 and has dedicated himself to the life of awakening, not just for himself, but for the awakening of all beings. And he has a nonprofit that he founded, I believe, with his beautiful wife, Gitu, who's with us tonight, the Ahimsa Trust. And Ahimsa Trust represents Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village community in India. And they do amazing and powerful work. And I hope that you will all take a chance to look at the website, and I'll put a link in later. During COVID, they've done incredible. They stepped up and changed direction to do humanitarian work in India, helping to provide meals and resources to people who are suffering. And I just want to read what their mission statement is, if I may. And I hope this isn't too much for you, Shantum, but the Ahimsa mission is to spread the ethics of peace and nonviolence through alliances and programs in area of mindfulness in education, culture, environment, gender sensitization, responsible tourism, and sustainable livelihoods. And this is such a beautiful mission, and I just want to say it speaks to the depth of insight and engaged wisdom that our friend, is manifesting in the world. It's a very broad umbrella of awakening, and I find it deeply inspiring. So I've probably said more than Shantum may have liked, except that I will add he's a world-renowned Buddhist scholar, and he has been consulted on a number of books I will not plague you, I won't bore you with or take the time to share with you. A number of movies, including the great PBS series on the Buddha, there's which he was a part of, consulted, and in multiple installments of that. And it's just with a lot of joy now that I am going to mute myself, and also with greater joy that I am going to turn the evening over to Thai Shantumji. And let's offer a bow.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for that very sort of, I would say, praiseworthy type of introduction. It was not that. I think we are friends, and we are friends for a long time, and that's important. And we're also brothers in the Dhamma. We have the same teacher, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, and I think that is the most important link we have. But what is also nice is that really to speak to the San Diego Sangha, which is where Peter is based, and thank you for inviting me to do so. And I thought that, well, it'll be nice to invite the friends in India, the Ahimsa Sangha, to join. And so this is actually a bit of a joining of two sanghas, and maybe it's the West Coast with the India coast. And we sometimes say that the Zoom calls are like internet connectivity is a bit like interbeing through space. So we're trying to manifest interbeing through space through India and the West Coast of America. So when Peter asked me to share, he'd actually suggested that I speak a little bit about my life, which he's spoken about already, and about my meeting Thai, and then the life of the Buddha and the pilgrimage. But between the time that he asked me to speak and now, two important people passed away. One of our friends in the Sangha, Malashri, her daughter, and my father. And so I thought that maybe it may be appropriate at this time to also speak a little bit about my understanding of death, or no death, as I understand it from the deeper teachings of the Buddha. Again, I must say I'm very happy to be speaking with friends in California. I'm right now on the East Coast. I happen to be in America because I came here to drop my daughters to school. But I find that the Dhamma is universal. And of course, it manifests in India, in the soil of India. But I met Thai in America, in fact, in California. And I've also found that America and California has manifested the Dhamma in a way that is appropriate to them, and has also done a lot in terms of the scientific authentication of practices like mindfulness that have made the Dhamma much more accessible to a very, very wide population in the world. So I don't see a separation really between India and California. It's just we are culturally slightly different. That is true. But in terms of being human beings and having the benefit of the Dhamma, I think that we are both beneficiaries. And so to start a little bit with my own story, but some of you might know it, and I think Peter mentioned it. I was an executive in a multinational in England, and at the age of about 23, I had all the external, signs of success. Come 5th of May, 1979, which is the day after Margaret Thatcher got elected in England, I was driving an MGB sports car with my girlfriend, and a little too fast, and boom, that was it. I woke up in hospital the next day, and I should have died, basically. But this was a huge, big wake-up call. And in a way, not that I recommend that you should have a near-death experience, but it really woke me up. And I think at that time, I was not very familiar with the Dhamma, but I did know the teachings of the Mahabharata, which is an epic in India. And on the inevitability of death, there's a character, the eldest brother of the Pandavas, Yudhishthira, and he's asked, what is the most amazing thing about which you've experienced? And he says something like, and this question is asked by his father, who actually happens to be the god of death. And if he answers wrongly, then his 4 brothers who are already dead will not rise again, etc. He says, what's the most amazing thing in the world? And he said, actually, the most amazing thing is that even though every day we see living beings dying all around us, we still think that, and we still live as if we will live forever. And as I contemplated that at that time, I realized that everyone must die. Of course, I must die. And I realized that everyone I cared for and saw around me must die. And no one escapes it, even the sages, the yogis, even the Buddha. So that is how this realization of death actually made me more alive, and also gave me a sense of the preciousness of life. Of course, there's always an uncertainty of when we would die. And the interesting thing is that from the time we are born to the time we die, or at least as soon as we are born, we know that we're getting closer and closer to death. We only have a finite number of breaths. So once we're on our track in our life, we're going to die. And it was interesting, my daughter, when I was talking to her yesterday, she says, yes, of course, if you're born, you're going to die. And that is a truism which all of us know, but some of us, we don't face it enough. And I think death is a great teacher. And there's something quite nice about facing that inevitability of death. It sort of loosens your fear of death in that sense, I feel. So I sort of treated my life after the accident a bit like a second life. And so I felt I should do something useful in my life. I shouldn't just waste it, have some purpose. And I'd been quite affected by by a very draconian political regime in India at the time. And so I thought that the best way to change the world is through political activism. And so I became a political activist, quite an angry one, seeing all these social injustices. And I was not a very peaceful person at all, even though my name, Shantum, means peacefulness. I was not at all peaceful. I was actually, but in this process, I burnt out, doing huge demonstrations, going to jail, organizing big opposition movements. And so in this process, when I burnt out, I started looking for a way of being peace. And this is what Peter was alluding to. And I then went to my teachers in India, and I then went to in the Hindu faith, and then I went even the Christian faith, the Sufis. But slowly I started finding that the Buddhist path really suited me. And I think the one thing which really struck me at that time, being brought up in India, was that this understanding or this teaching of anatma, or the understanding that there is no such thing as an independently existing entity like an atma that transcends body to body based on karma of this life. Now, I know there are many Buddhist schools which do believe that, but my understanding, what I got from the Buddha, was that that was not necessarily part of the Buddha's teaching. And the reason I came to that was because I was coming from a political background, and I felt it really justified the caste system and the sort of oppression through or hereditary non-privilege, which we have in India. So that is one thing which I liked. And the second thing I liked very much was the primacy of suffering, that, you know, we have a felt experience of suffering. We all have it, whether it's not getting what we want, being with people we don't like, getting angry, having a sickness. All these things are a felt experience of suffering. And I think the Buddha was starting at that point, and that is very important. And again, being involved in the political world, I realized how much need there was, even for basic things like clean drinking water, food, basic human rights. So I like to start there. And then that there was this degree of self-reliance, that we could actually do something about our own liberation. This was a path of liberation, a path of awakening, but we could do something about it. It wasn't based just on fate or some sort of, grace of some other entity. And the fourth element which I liked about the Buddha's teachings was the emphasis on mindfulness. The practice of mindfulness is energy of really being awake to the present, to one's felt experience, and both what is happening within oneself and outside of oneself in the present moment. So this practice I started getting interested in. And then I started searching for Buddhist teachers. And in India, we didn't have many Buddhist teachers, though I practiced with Goenkaji at that time. He was a Vipassana teacher. And then I came to America, and here I met teachers from the Korean tradition, from the Japanese tradition. In India, I also met teachers from the Tibetan tradition. But slowly, then I arrived in California, and I was at the Ojai Foundation, and there was a teacher coming there who was Vietnamese, whose name nobody could pronounce. And I happened to be on staff. I was doing the recording. And as soon as I saw this man walking just gliding, in his brown robe towards the speaking tree, which is a large oak tree, I pretty much involuntarily got up and bowed. And he was Thich Nhat Hanh. And in the next 5 days, which is a retreat for artists, I think he really brought home to me not just the wisdom of the Buddha, but really the felt experience of peace. In fact, on the second day, we were doing walking meditation. And, I just felt that sort of peacefulness imprinting with every step, as Thich Nhat Hanh had given us the instructions. And I said, wow, this can be done. This is possible. It's not peace just as a concept. And here's Thai combining a sort of a Zen and a Vipassana practice in mindfulness. And so I was this Indian seeker on the west coast of America, and I'd found somebody who could really be my guru, my teacher. So I went back to India. I remember I returned home on the 6th of December, 1987. It was the day of my father's 64th birthday. It's the same age I am now. And on the immigration form, when I had to return to India, I wrote, to look after my ailing and aging parents. Of course, I had the next 34 years with him and 30 years with my mother, both in good health, luckily. But anyway, this was something I had to fill on a form. But when I was back in India, I wrote a letter to Thai, and which didn't get posted for 3 months, in fact. But in it, I'd written that if you ever want to come to India, please feel free to ask me for any help I can. And he just finished the book Old Path, White Clouds, and which is on the life of the Buddha. And he was planning a pilgrimage to India, in effect, to say thank you to the Buddha. So, number of causes and conditions together, he arrived in India in November 1988. And a lot happened on this journey. But I remember in Kushinagar, which is where the Buddha passed away, it was a full moon night. And I think he was very keen that I became a monk. So between Sichang Kong and he, mainly Sichang Kong, shaved my head. And I had a big beard and long hair. And that is all gone. And the next day he gave teachings at Kushinagar about what the Buddha was doing on the last moments of his life. And the Buddha was lying down between two trees, two sala trees, and an older man came, a man called Subhada, and he asked the Buddha a question saying, there are many, many teachers, Nigata Nagaputta, Mahakali Goshala, etc. Who is enlightened? And the Buddha said, it's not important who is enlightened. You can awaken yourself if you practice. And the Buddha gave the teachings of the Eightfold Path to Subhada. These are the teachings he'd given in Sarnath 45 years before, and the last teachings he was giving again on how to be awakened. So I felt that this is a path that many of us can take. But then when he's lying down and he's watching the sunset, he asks everyone gathered there, he says, are the teachings to overcome suffering and attain liberation clear to you? And there's silence. That means the teachings are well understood. But he asks a second time out of compassion, he says, in case you feel shy, ask your neighbor to ask, or don't say later that your teacher was here and you didn't ask. Is there anything unclear about the teachings? And again, there was silence. So then he says his last words, which is something like, all conditioned reality is subject to decay, strive on diligently. Basically mean that everything is impermanent, just keep up the practice. Anand, who was his attendant for many years, had just before that been crying, and the Buddha had said, Anand, how many times have I told you, if something is born, it must die. And birth and death are taking place in every moment. And we must meditate on impermanence. But if we look deeper, we shall see that impermanence means that all things arise in dependence on each other. All that exists comes to be and disappears because of causes and conditions. So as Thai reminds us, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's Peter and my common teacher, and many of our teachers, Thai often reminds us, this is because that is, this is not because that is not, this is born because that is born, this ceases to be because that ceases to be. So when we look deeper still, we see that because everything arises in dependence on something else, there's no such thing as a separate entity like an Atma soul. Everything is co-dependently arising. And hence, everything is empty of a separate self. So this understanding of shunyata, this understanding of interbeing is developed in this teaching. And that's what the Buddha is really alluding to as the other side of the coin of impermanence. So impermanence we can think of in terms of the perspective of time. Everything's in flux, no fixed identity. But in the perspective of space, we can think of non-self, interbeing, things are transforming, and how each thing contains everything else. So impermanence and non-self are not rules of concepts, but keys to open the door of reality. And that's why a lot of the meditations around which we are offered and we practice are around that. So I also feel this is the greatest teachings that the Buddha offered this is what he was discovering under the Bodhi tree. Looking at the leaves, seeing that all the elements are in the leaf, whether it's the sunshine or the rain or the earth or the oxygen in the air. And if one of those four elements was taken out, the leaf would not exist. And the Buddha must have also looked at the clouds, and as Thai very eloquently, poetically, in fact, speaks about the clouds. He often says that the cloud might change shape, might change color, but it may have a different type of shadow on the earth, may become rain or snow, even even water in a teacup. But the cloud never dies. It just keeps transforming. And so we get attached and miss that cloud, which we might think, oh, what a beautiful cloud, what a beautiful fluffy cloud. So this teaching that the Buddha offered, and which Thai so eloquently has shared with us, is based on signlessness. But to understand that signlessness does not mean eternalism. It does not mean annihilation. It means sort of continuation, a manifestation because of cause and conditions. So I recall on one of those trips with Thai in India, he paused, he stopped, and he said something like, Shantam, the issue of birth and death is as urgent as your turban, as if your turban is on fire. I used to wear a turban at the time. So he looks at me, looks at my turban and says, the issue of birth and death is as urgent as if your turban is on fire. And these are very profound teachings. So this realization that this is important teaching, but of course it has to be, the realization of it is very difficult. And the realization is not an understanding from outside, but again, comes with the practice. It's a bit like a grain of salt and the sea. You have to be in it to realize it. So it is important to understand this intellectually anyway, to understand that there is this understanding of signlessness, of no birth and no death. But when we realize it as a felt experience, then it can alleviate our suffering and the challenges of our life. So I was going to lead a meditation, which is from a book which Thai has given a number of very good meditations. It's called The Blooming of a Lotus. And it's on signlessness. And we start this practice with the awareness of the breath, which is wonderful. I think every meditation practice starts in that way. It's wonderful. But we very quickly move to the depth of the in-breath, the depth of the breath. So it's not just the birth of the breath, but the depth of the breath. And so how we see the in-breath being born, and how we see the in-breath dying. And we see these different marks of the breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, birth and death marks. And then as we continue, we see that the breath is dependent on all sorts of causes and conditions. So it's not coming from nowhere. It's manifesting because of the lungs, because of the nose, because of the air, because of the trees, the bronchial tubes, the muscles in your respiratory channel. So all these different elements allows the breath to manifest. And then when we breathe out, again, different conditions like the lungs being full don't allow the breath to continue. So we see all these causes and conditions allowing a breath to manifest and the breath to not manifest. So in Buddhist parlance, we call it the non-coming, non-going marks of the breath, because we say the breath doesn't come from anywhere, it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't go to the north, the south, the east, the west. It just manifests because of causes and conditions, and doesn't manifest because of causes and conditions. So I thought we will do a little practice like that, and then we can see how our time is, and then we will have some. But let's sit for a little while, and I'll guide a little practice together. So friends, please sit in a comfortable way. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. You can feel this comfortable way in your seat. And I'm going to invite the sound of the bell. And then I'll just give some instructions as we go along. And those of us who are familiar with this form of practice, or who are unfamiliar with the form of practice, I might say something like breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And then give a key word like in or out, which allows you to refocus on that concentration. But if you forget the words, don't worry, just focus on your breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, and just enjoy the practice. Yeah. And this is really a practice to try and get a deeper insight on no birth, no death, the understanding of manifestation because of conditions. So friends, as I said, just take a comfortable posture. If you're sitting on a chair, you can put your feet on the ground, flat on the ground. If you're sitting on a cushion, just with your legs crossed, hands on your lap or on your knees, keeping your back straight, relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your arms. Just feeling the in-breath and the out-breath. Just feeling the breath like an inner massage. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And silently in your mind, if it helps you, you might say in with the in-breath and out with the out-breath. Aware of my in-breath, I breathe in. Seeing my in-breath no longer there, I breathe out. Aware of in-breath no longer there. Aware of the birth of my in-breath, I breathe in. Aware of the death of my in-breath, I breathe out. Birth of in-breath, death of in-breath. Seeing my in-breath born from conditions, I breathe in. Seeing my in-breath die from conditions, I breathe out. Birth of in-breath conditional, death of in-breath conditional. Seeing my in-breath comes from nowhere, I breathe in. Seeing my in-breath goes nowhere, I breathe out. Breath from nowhere, breath going nowhere. Seeing my in-breath without birth and death, I breathe in. Seeing my in-breath free from birth and death, I breathe out. Breath without birth and death, free from birth and death. Aware of my eyes, I breathe in. Seeing my eyes born from conditions, I breathe out. Aware of eyes, eyes conditional. Seeing my eyes come from nowhere, I breathe in. Seeing my eyes go nowhere, I breathe out. Eyes from nowhere, eyes going nowhere. Seeing my eyes have no birth and death, I breathe in. Seeing my eyes free from birth and death, I breathe out. Eyes without birth and death, eyes free from birth and death. Now we become aware of our body as we breathe in and see my body born from conditions as I breathe out. Aware of body, body conditional. Seeing my body comes from nowhere, I breathe in. Seeing my body goes nowhere, I breathe out. Body from nowhere, body going nowhere. Seeing my body has no birth and death, I breathe in. Seeing my body free from birth and death, I breathe out. body without birth and death, free from birth and death. Aware of my consciousness, I breathe in. Seeing my consciousness born from conditions, I breathe out. Aware of consciousness, consciousness conditional. Seeing my consciousness comes from nowhere, I breathe in. Seeing my consciousness goes nowhere, I breathe out. Consciousness from nowhere, consciousness goes nowhere. Seeing my consciousness has no birth and death, I breathe in. Seeing my consciousness free from birth and death, I breathe out. Consciousness without birth and death, free from birth and death. So friends, those of us who'd like to massage our face or our legs, just for a moment. So friends, it's a short practice. Of course, we can do it on our own, and we can develop each one of these ourselves, looking at any part of our body. Or of course, the breath is the great vehicle for a lot of practice. And so as we become more and more familiar with the breath, we can actually enjoy seeing the depth of our in-breath as our out-breath. And then looking at that as a teacher for other things in our life, and looking at how these causes and conditions bring about a certain manifestation at a particular point in time. And there's so many other teachings of the Buddha, the teachings given to the sick by Anathapindika, which is Anathapindika's deathbed, when Shariputra leads him through a guided meditation, scanning his body and realizing that the body has come about because of different sort of conditions. There's no such thing as my body or his body at that point. Or the famous sutra by Anuruddha, where the Buddha, where Anuruddha is asked by somebody, will the Tathagat exist after he passes away, not exist after he passes away, both exist and not exist after he passes away, or neither exist or not exist after he passes away? And this dialogue, then Anuruddha can't answer the question for the people who ask him, so he asks the Buddha. And then the Buddha asks him, can you define me in form, in feelings, in perceptions, in mental formations, and consciousness? I'm sitting right in front of you. Can you define me? And Anuruddha says, no. So then what are you looking for the Tathagat after he passes away? Everything is just manifesting because of cause and conditions in this very moment, and always changing because of this cause and conditions. So these are wonderful teachings, and these are teachings which allow us to get a sense of freedom through death. And so when I was contemplating my father's death, in a way I felt, yes, it's inevitable he was going to pass away. In fact, but I was trying to put some of the teachings of signlessness into practice. And I was reminded of these 5 remembrances, which we are asked to remember every day. The remembrance that I'm of the nature to get old, of the nature to get sick. We realize that we'll be separated from all we cherish, we will die. But really our actions and the results of our action are our heirs. And the legacy of our thoughts, our words, our deeds will continue through the impressions we leave behind in the lives of those we've influenced and touched in any way. So looking at the guidance of signlessness, where did my father go? I was questioning myself. And of course, I've got used to seeing my father in different forms, from when I was growing up. He was a very kind man, always elegantly dressed. But the photos of him as a young man, full of ambition and sort of a drive, to a middle-aged man who was still very active, visionary, and then finally, just before his passing away, quite frail, contemplative. So as we are asked to contemplate, we say, was he the same person? Or was he a different person? And maybe not same, not different. And what form was I holding on to in this constantly changing, evolving person? And now I don't see him in that form. And can I see him in other forms? And I think the Buddha helps us to see the ones we pass away in different forms. It could be as material as a house that he built for the family to live in Noida, or other forms, other houses we lived in Delhi or Calcutta or Patna, or even in the tin shack that he stayed in Missouri, where when he ran away from home and didn't want to marry somebody, so he ran away from home. So the tin shack is still there 60, 70 years later. Or the college he went to, which I followed, St. Stephen's College in Delhi. We both went to the same college. So I see him there. Or the tree that we planted on his 75th birthday, which is near our house. And it was meant to be a neem tree, and then it turned out to be a Persian lilac. And then I see children playing cricket underneath, under the shade of that tree. And, he was a shoe man, loved his shoes. Everything in the house had, all the furniture had to be upholstered in leather. He loved his coffee in his thin, bone china Wedgwood chair, a cup. He liked his red label whiskey in the evening with the glass, with PS, and his to-do list, which he would tick off every day in an impressive management style. So these are all, when I see them, I can see him still sitting in that chair, drinking the coffee, polishing his shoes. And then, of course, all the people, all his children, my brother, my sister, his grandchildren, all his relatives. And he was a bit like a clan leader in a way. So all his friends, their children. And so I see him in them. And of course, as he passed away recently, a lot of people have been recounting stories which I was not even aware of. Many of his colleagues in the footwear industry, he was known as the shoe guru. And the institutions he worked in, he set up institutions which have thousands of people graduating every year, get jobs, which is a great blessing in a country like India. So I can see him in all of them, or in me. I mean, of course, every breath, my face, my hands, they're all him. And I followed in his footsteps, literally, as a shoemaker. So I went to the same college, got the same medals 30 years after him. But I think most importantly, trying to also see how I can emulate or develop the wonderful characteristics he had of open-mindedness, a cheerfulness, even in the face of real adversity in many, many ways, including having a horrible disease all his life, a psoriasis, which was really, very, very troublesome, painful, very disciplined, eating just in measured amounts, having a strong ethic for hard work and also self-confidence, very family-minded, as I said, chief of the clan type thing, and great man manager, generosity, always wanted to help. In fact, even when he died, his last act of generosity was giving his eyes away and giving his body away to science. And it's interesting to see that somebody else is looking through those eyes now. So this interbeing nature, this sort of non-birth, non-death nature, is a wonderful realization, I feel. And another thing which my father always managed to do was sleep well. It is interesting. He always slept. He put his head down to the pillow and go poop and sleep. And I remember there's a famous, I think Leonardo da Vinci wrote one, something like, he said, just as a well-spent day brings a happy sleep, so a life well spent brings a happy death. And I think I like that, to think about my father like that. And of course, I'll miss him in the way. I do miss him already, in the way I was used to seeing him. But when I see my hands and when I see my face in the mirror, and he wasn't very keen on beards, but this is it. And of course, when I drink my coffee, my freshly brewed coffee, I'm very happy that he's continuing well. So I think every person who dies is a teacher, actually. And of course, my father brought that more home, in a stronger way to me. And also teaching me to live more happily and peacefully in the present moment, I think, to value this life. And this is a great benefit, I feel, of the teachings I've received personally from Thai and all our ancestral teachers have brought from the Buddha. And the last time I saw my father was just 6 weeks before he passed. And of course, then he called Gitu, my wife, and myself, I touched his feet, which is way of respect. And he blessed us and laying his hands on our heads and offering us his ashirvad. So, it is his 98th year, a life well spent. But I think I'm so happy that I can get this sense of both my blood father in a way and my spiritual father, who I see as Thich Nhat Hanh, around the same age, teaching me in different ways how to live a fulfilled and wholesome life, and yet to also understand the mystery of life in a way of awakening and, maybe shifting my career from shoemaking to awakening. So I will pause there. When I talked to Peter earlier, we talked about leaving about half an hour at the end for discussion or question and answers, which I think Peter would be happy to facilitate, I gather. Would that be okay, Peter? And I will invite one more sound of the bell before we transition onto that, if that's okay. So thank you again for your attentiveness. And since, I'm open to any questions or anything else which you may, and Peter can facilitate that through people putting up their hands or doing something in the chat. I'm not quite sure how we would do that.
Dear Shantum, thank you for a beautiful talk and meditation, and what a joy to be with you tonight. And dear friends, this is an opportunity to speak the language of our heart and to share any questions that we may have about the deep teaching of no birth, no death, or practice in general. Or I might add, having one of the world's great scholars of the historic Buddha in our midst. If you have any questions about Buddha's life or Buddhism, this would be a nice opportunity to ask them. And I invite you to put them into chat or to raise your hand, and then we'll invite you to bow in and ask a question. And in that spirit, I will also add the words that Ty always shared when we did a question answer session, which is that a good question doesn't need to be long, and it should really be something that comes from the heart, something that's important to the heart and maybe of value to others as well. So with that, I will bow out and open it for anybody. If you want to express gratitude or ask a question, to please raise your hand and we'll call on you. We have a question in chat. Could you, from Rajana Shankar, could you please explain consciousness is conditional? Isn't consciousness the substratum of all existence?
Okay, thank you for that question, Ranjani. It's a very perfectly Indian question. We're very interested in the philosophy of spirituality, but there is a big confusion in India about the understanding of consciousness between what I see as the Buddha Dharma and the Brahmanical Dharma. And the Buddha Dharma, I understand consciousness as being consciousness of something. It's always conditional. You have to be conscious of something. So, of course, there's the development of the understanding of consciousness as we've seen in our tradition through Vasabandhu, of the 8 layers of consciousness, etc., with the alaya, etc. But essentially, it's always consciousness of something. And if it's consciousness of something, in its very nature, it's conditional. it is not something which exists in of itself, which is sometimes seen as, in some traditions, as existent with unconditionally. So. I do see a question about how do you justify death of the young? I'm sorry, I should also say, if anybody feels that they're not satisfied with the answer, they can always ask again, or another answer to it. But it's not a, I had 3 cousins and then a blood sister who all died young. And it is one of the worst experiences for a mother for that to happen. And in some senses, the word is not to justify. It cannot be justified. There's nothing like that. But I think it's how to cope with it, how to cope with that experience of a loss of a child. I see my aunt, and in case my mother, how they coped with it. There was a lot of grace, a lot of love, but a lot of deep suffering too, which is inevitable. I think, as I was trying to share, a lot of this, a lot of life, in fact, all of life, is all sorts of causes and conditions. So in the case of, say, my 3 cousins who died, I realized, or we realized later, that the blood of the 2, the mother and the father, were not matching for children. Now, this may be a scientific explanation for, why a child passes away, and then we often need that. But I think we have to look deeper to see that there's some cause and condition which are beyond our understanding. And so we have to be grateful that they were here just for a short time. And sometimes I just look at it like that we have to be so, each day, each moment is so precious with our children, with our young ones, that, we don't know when somebody's going to die, or when a child is going to leave us. So, yeah, just treasure every moment. And that's the best we can do. Not to feel that, have an idea that this child will grow up and lead a good life. I hope they do. But I think we just look at each day as it comes, and that's a very good way of living life. As some people say, and some wise people say, live each day as if you were that is your last day. And I think that also means in our relationships with our own children, or with the young people we're with. It's very, very, very hardwired in thinking that, of course, the young will live and the old will die. But we know that it's and I also think that Buddhism, in its own way, or the Buddha Dharma in its own way, is quite, I would say, what's the right word? It's quite accepting of just things happening by coincidence, coincidence, meaning these causes and conditions happen. So it's not, when we look, how do we justify the death of the young one? It's just that, yeah, things happen. It's how do we cope with that, which is more important. It's not that young don't die. It's going to happen now, it's going to happen later. Really horrible things happen in the world, or to ourselves. But it's how to cope with the suffering. And I think the Buddha, it's funny, at the end of the Anuruddha Sutra, he says something like, all I teach is the existence of suffering and the overcoming of suffering. And it's that understanding of no birth and no death, the understanding of causes and conditions manifesting, even the death of a young one. If you can accept that, understand that, then we will be free from that suffering.
Thank you.
Invite one sound of the bell for just.
Okay, please. We have a few more questions in chat that I've jotted down, but one live question from Joe. If you'd like to unmute and bow in, Joe.
Hi, Joe. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Shantum, thank you so much. Very timely for me. My dad passed away 10 days ago. And I guess you touched on it, I think, just now before Pete broke off to me about, I mean, I can understand, well, I'm learning the concept of no birth, no death, but I have such a heavy heart. My dad, I mean, I had such a really great relationship with my dad. And I think about how much he overcame to ultimately become the father, grandfather that he is, and what he passed on to me and my sisters. And I was the only child, I'm his only boy. So we had a really deep, deep bond. And I saw him in a state, that he wasn't alive anymore. And I can appreciate that he has passed, but how, and is suffering, is sadness to be considered suffering? And is that what I don't want to bypass the sadness. So I don't want to, I'm afraid to get, so the idea of like, well, he's here and now he's not, and he's into something else without really recognizing how sad I am about it. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I articulated what I'm trying to say, but I don't want to bypass.
Yeah, I understand. And I feel the same. I feel a deep sense of sadness, grief, loss. This pain is inevitable, I think, as being a human being. And it's important that we feel this. It is a break in our, it's like cutting an umbilical cord, even though we've been living for, I don't know how old your father was, but I'm 64 years with my father. But I think it's one of those sort of interesting axioms which say, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I think it's how much and how deeply we go into the second arrow element of it, saying, why me, why this, what that. I think it's the acceptance, which is a very key part of it. But yes, the acceptance is, the tears are real, the grief is real. But it's also, I think, deep acceptance that this is what has happened, and not wishing that the time will return. Many of us have regrets. It's often, small regrets. Oh, why didn't I do that? How could I have done that? Why was I not there at that moment? Or, could I have called the doctor? Every one of us, I think to look at that and say, I did my best. So there's not a lot of beating up of oneself. I think that's something which, all of us have a tendency to do. And then I think the celebration of his life is very important, to realize that, as I was saying, those seeds are in us of my father. And of course, we can see them very clearly. There may be aspects which are not very pleasurable, maybe could have been a short temper, for example. But on the other side, there are many, many absolutely beautiful feelings and transmissions to us. So I think to develop those and to see our father with us. And I remember Thai saying sometimes, you can just, walk with your father, even though he's not there. You're walking with your father's feet. So I took a walk in the forest close by, and I did exactly that. I just walked with my father's feet. And so it's a very different experience. So he's still living in me. It's not the form, and the form I will miss. But if there's anybody or any entity that is really your father, is you, more than anyone else. Because, as you say, you're the only son, and, the other. So I feel that that's what's important to realize, that he is not dead he's dead in the conventional sense of a relative world. Yes, he will not be, but in a more ultimate sense, in a more deeper sense, in a spiritual sense, he is very much alive, and he is alive beyond even our conception, in the sense of what work he did, how it's going to have ramifications. Like I was saying, we had no idea that the tree we plant when he was 75, kids will be playing cricket under it. And, whatever they're doing, they're having joy. It's a small thing, but, so I think we have to look at that side. And in India, it's interesting, when people died in old age, we don't mourn so much as celebrate. It's a fully well-lived life. And sometimes you will see, even when a woman has died with children, grandchildren, etc., and being brought to the funeral pyre, people are singing and dancing. There's a fulfilled life. So I think we have to accept that death is a very much part of life. And how do we handle it? But not to say, I'm not feeling it, I am feeling grief, but then not to over emphasize, but try and come out of that with a wisdom. So my father is my teacher. That's your father is your teacher. Thank you.
So, dear Shantum, we have two questions that are you have touched on and spoken to, but I'm going to read to honor them. One is from John, which is similar to Joe's in a way, but different. I am right now experiencing the possibility of losing my 31-week-old baby. I'm integrating this reality. I'm present to my breath and the sensations in my body. How do I keep staying in the present in such a situation? And my mental chatter also judges me of doing spiritual bypassing when I do so. And I guess I'll save the other one for after. Thank you. You're muted, brother.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Chan's letter. I'm right next to well, Chan, this is again a little bit like I was sharing with Joe, but on the other end of the spectrum in a way. You are the father rather than the son, but we all know life is a mystery. I mean, every baby born is a miracle. The fact that we have, and because of good medical science, we have more children born now than we had in any other time in history. We're very fortunate. But inevitably, some children will not die, will not survive. And so it may sound cold and practical, but that's what it is. And so I don't think it's spiritual bypassing to really understand that death is inevitable, but we don't wish it for a fetus. But we've known that in many cases, mothers have died. The Buddha's mother died giving childbirth, and we've known through history how many women have died and how many women have suffered, and also how many children have died. So I think the best thing is what you're doing, is to really stay with it moment by moment and experience what is happening to your body, to your feelings, and trying to be connected, bonded with the child, with the fetus, but as much with the mother, because I think the mother really needs that care and caressing and hugging and being with at this time. Because as men, we really we can't, I guess, even imagine what it means for a woman to be losing a child who's been living for 30 weeks within them. So I think it's both your loss, but it's also very much a responsibility that you play at this time of being a father and a husband or a partner or whatever relationship you have with the mother. So yeah, I think it's, as I said, they're all teachers, all entities are teachers. And our children are teachers, our fathers are teachers, and even the unborn child is a teacher. So we all have an unborn child in us too, and let that child develop in that way that he or she can.
Thank you, Shantum. May I invite the bell? Such deep and beautiful questions. We have one from Simran Lal. Thank you so much, dear Shantam. It was beautiful. Could you please elaborate on what you said about the impressions we create in this lifetime and carry forward?
Yes. So Simran, thank you for that question. It's again one of those questions where we have a little bit of a Indian base in it, because we believe quite strongly that we carry something from this life into the next life. And it's quite deeply embedded in our culture. I have no idea whether that is so. I have a very agnostic view on that. What I do know is that there's an effect, everything we think or do or speak has some sort of impact or impression that is created from it. So everything like that has some sort of effect. Whether that transcends from body to body or in lifetime to lifetime, I'm no one to know, and I have no idea about it. What I do know is that those impressions are carried by our children very much, by the people we meet, the work we do. So these impressions go much beyond our own lifetime in a myriad of ways, which are not always not always noble. But the motivation of doing things will create good impressions. So our motivation is very, very important. And if our motivation comes from compassion, from good heart, from helpfulness, from love, then whatever impressions we are creating will be healthy. And if they're coming from hate or greed or something like that, then of course, those impressions that are created on the minds of our children or our friends or in a society at large are not very beneficial. So I think it's very difficult to say what will happen, what we carry forward into another life, but we definitely, it is carried forward by beyond our life. The Buddha's teachings are very clear that there's no such thing as a independently existing entity that transcends body to body. There's nothing like that. So how those impressions are carried by our children, the work we do, and the effect of the work we do, and the effect of the life we've lived. So I don't know if that helps you in your answer, but that's what I can share right now. But thanks for the question, Simran. And I know what your work you do, and you create very good impression. I mean, it's creating a generation of a different type of mindset in India. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Shantam, dear noble community. Um, I believe that now Shantam has left an impression on all of us that's stored in our store consciousness and in our hearts. And we are profoundly now your continuation and better for it, brother. And it's 8:27 Pacific time, so with some sadness and some joy, it's time to call our practice together and time together to a close. But I would like to put the link for Ahimsa Trust back into chat one more time and let the community know that um, we do not ask for dana in our Sangha, which is an expression of generosity. But if you have some great gratitude and the means or ability to express your gratitude by helping Ahimsa do the very important work that they're doing in India and globally, as we can see right here and now. And just to be informed, take a look at the link and go and visit and see what they're doing, and we can all look into our hearts and see how we can carry on the important work of awakening and transforming our world in the ways that they are. So I would like to take the opportunity to invite the bell, and we can express our gratitude. We can bring our palms together at the heart and send the energy of our hearts to our teacher this evening, Brother Shantum. As always, it's an honor to sit with you and be with you, brother, and the Thai in you as well. And we have a practice of sharing the merit here, which is where we acknowledge all of the goodness of our night, the richness of the Dharma and our community, and deep listening and loving kindness and generosity expressed here this evening. And I'd like to close with a sharing of the merit that Larry Ward has penned. It speaks to my heart. As we listen, I invite you to open your heart and let the words in, and send your heart along with the sound of the bell after. May the nectar of kindness touch our lips as we speak. May we find ourselves in the vast blue sky of inclusiveness. And may our hands turn the wheels of time towards a more just world, a more beautiful world, a world worthy of our holy lives. I normally would invite the Sangha to unmute at this time, but perhaps we can try it if people want to visit, and unmute yourselves if you care to express gratitude.
Thank you, dear Shantum. This is Simran. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, dear Shantum. Thank you, dear Pete. This is Jill.
Thank you, Shantum.
Thank you, Shantum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shantam. Bye.
Thank you, Shantum. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Very
you.
nice to meet you.
Shukran, shukran.
Thank
Thank you, shukran.
you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
Pete.
Shantum.
Thank you, Pete.
Bye.
Nicole asked if we could sing together. That doesn't always work so well in Zoom.
Yeah, it's not bad. You can do no coming, no going.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you like to get us started then, brother?
Yeah, I'm not the best melodious voice, but yeah, I can get it started, and then we can maybe mute ourselves if it's getting cacophonous.
It's a cacophony. I'm a fan of cacophony.
Okay.
Oh,
No coming, no going, no after,
No before,
I
I hold you
close
close to me.
I
Release you to be free,
Free.
because I am in you, and you are in me. Because I am in you, and you are in me.
more time.
Yes.
No going after, no before.
I I hold
I hold
you
you
close to
to
me.
me.
I
I release you
to be so
to be so free.
because
I
am in
am
you,
you,
and
and
you
you
are
are
in
in
me.
me.
because
Because I
I'm
am in
you.
you, and you are in me.
Hey.